Hi, the SI meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Tuesday, August 20th. Well, suddenly the sun has become quite active. Numerous sunspots are now visible on the Earth-facing side of the sun. Just a few days ago, it was rather quiet, but in the last couple of days, a number of sunspot regions have now emerged. In addition to the increase in the sunspot activity, there actually was a coronal mass ejection early this morning on the far side of the sun. Since it was on the far side of the sun, it should not have an impact on the Earth's upper atmosphere. But in addition to the coronal mass ejection, there was a small comet that plunged into the sun early this morning. Not too surprisingly, it did not survive. We actually have video from the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory at SOHO system that NASA has up in space of both the coronal mass ejection and the small comet as it plunged into the sun early this morning. Before we get to the video, here's a current look at the sun. Notice all these sunspot regions that have suddenly appeared. Here's one right here, another one right here, yet another one here, and on. These are rotating into the picture. There's another one right in this region right now. All of these are rotating in this fashion. So again, in just the last couple of days, there's been quite a dramatic increase in the number of sunspots. Not too surprisingly, as we are in the solar maximum period of solar cycle number 24, and there's an expectation that perhaps there can be a dramatic uptick in the sunspot activity over the next few months that would result in a double peak of solar activity for this particular solar cycle number 24. Well, here's a look at solar cycle number 24 and the previous solar cycle number 23 in terms of sunspot numbers, and we are right in this region right here for this particular solar cycle number 24. Again, notice this peak that occurred back at the end of 2011. There are some solar scientists that expect a secondary peak right in this region right here, perhaps over the next couple of months, next few months or so. Again, we are in the period that was expected to be the solar maximum. Up until the last few days, the sun has been relatively quiet, but again, an increase in the number of sunspots in the last few days. Now it's looking quite active, and again, we mentioned there was a coronal mass ejection on the far side of the sun earlier this morning, and we'll have video that will show that in the next moment or two. Again, this is solar cycle 24, a rather negative trend in prior solar cycles. 23 was a larger solar cycle compared to this one, and some solar scientists believe the next one, solar cycle number 25, will be even weaker than the current solar cycle. This particular solar cycle number 24 is one of the weakest in many, many decades, may turn out to be the weakest in about 100 years. Well, here's video from NASA's SOHO, the Solar Observatory System. A couple of things to point out here. First of all, there was a coronal mass ejection. That's pretty obvious here. That occurred early this morning, again on the far side of the sun, so it is not expected to impact the Earth's upper atmosphere. But also there's video here of a small comet that plunged into the sun. Not surprisingly, it did not survive. Even though the timing was pretty similar in terms of when the small comet approached the sun and the coronal mass ejection, it looks like they did not really intersect with each other, as the coronal mass ejection was on the far side. Can you pick out the comet? I will now show you where the comet comes in, right in this region right here. You'll see a streak right here going in this direction, and it just disappeared. That was the end of that comet. Again, right here, this is about a video loop of about 7 hours, and that small comet just plunged into the sun at about the same time the coronal mass ejection occurred. Comet was still several millions of kilometers away from the sun when the explosion really got underway. The estimate is that this comet was only about 20-30 meters in diameter, a rather small comet. Not too uncommon for something like this to happen, but it's interesting that NASA actually captured all of this on video. The coronal mass ejection on the far side of the sun, and this small comet that plunged to its death on the other side of the sun. So we'll continue to monitor the sun over the next several days. Again, more activity in terms of sunspots and perhaps some solar storm activity over the next couple of weeks. That's it for now. For the SIweather.com, I'm meteorologist Paul Dorian.